because I mentioned Mick Foley before. He had his very final podcast. It's one of those things where he barely did any anyway. He did like once a month. Anyway, his final podcast that was out recently, and the big news, aside from the fact that he didn't really say anything about Vince McMahon, was that he wanted to have one more match at the age of 60. So the quote is, 60's right around the corner, Foley said. Thinking of doing one final match for my 60th birthday. Deathmatch, I'm not kidding. I think it would be a great incentive to drop those 100 big ones. 100 big ones mean he wants to lose 100 pounds. And I think it might be fun. No, not in WWE, I don't think so, because I think it would be a pretty gory spectacle just thinking about it. And then afterwards, when asked about who the opponents might be, John Moxley or Matt Cardona, Foley replied. I think Moxley would be the easiest, but Matt Cardona has the heat in the deathmatch world that could really make it something cool.
You know about these veterans, they can't quit. They just cannot quit. Why is it that singers can quit? I mean, they can just walk away, made their money, go home and relax. But there is an old saying about wrestling. You don't quit wrestling. Wrestling quits you. And that's basically what happens. So, and Mick would probably have a pretty good pay-per-view. He would do the same thing on it that Flair did. But it won't be a shining moment. And if he drops 100 big ones, what I thought he was saying at first was, well, it's going to cost you $100 to watch this. Drop 100 big ones on it. But he was saying, let me drop 100 big ones. Well, that would take a year so he could train, but what kind of match would it be?
He wants a death match. He wants a hardcore match. Basically, I think something that isn't athletically taxing but hurts a lot.
Wait a minute. None of his matches were ever that athletically taxing, except when he got thrown off the cage.
Do you know, I think that's a bit unfair on Mick, because I think he really, put the effort in a lot until about 98.
Oh, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he didn't work hard. He did. But he's, you wouldn't look at him and say, oh, he's not a Shawn Michaels.
No.
He's not this, he's not that. Athletically, he's limited, and he'll tell you that. But he could go out and he could bleed with the best of them and use fluorescent lighting, and he could use the barbed wire, and he could use the baseball bat, and he could use this and that and the other. I don't know. I think somebody got in the back of a car one day and pulled out all these gimmicks, like a hammer and a barbed wire, and wow, that'd be great to have in a match. I'm sure that's where it started. Let's put barbed wire around that. And hey, wait a minute, let's put bombs on it too. So if you touch it, it blows up. I don't know whose idea that was, but I think it was imported to Japan first. And I think it was brought into the country by guys, and I may be wrong, by guys like Mick who liked that shit because it gave their performance somewhere to go. So to me, I'm not like that. I'm a wussy. They wanted to put me on scalpels and stuff. And it was at one point I just said, I'm not doing it no more. Not doing it. And I even turned some matches down that were like no DQ. I said, I'm not doing it. One guy booked me one time, and I went there, and he was in a no DQ match, hardcore match. I said, I'm not doing it. Why, man, it's already booked. I said, I don't give a crap how you booked it. I told you I wasn't doing it. Well, what are we going to do? I said, well, the only thing I can say is I'll hardcore on you, and you just don't touch me. Well, man, would that work? I said, yeah, well, it'll work the way I do it. And it did work. I just beat him up. So... And then I gave him the finish, and we went home. But I don't know. I think he would have a pretty good pay-per-view buy rate on it. Because if it's his last match, people want to see that. But I actually, let me say this. I actually think Mick would take more in his performance or expect more out of himself than what Flair did. I think his performance, even though he's been out of the ring for 20 years, I think his performance would be better than what Flair's was. At least if he is still standing when the match ends, that's a victory for Mick, because we thought Rick was going to die. But Mick Foley, I think he'd give us a better performance than what Ric Flair did.
Do you know?
And speaking of Ric Flair, wait a minute. Here we go.
That's for.
I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to try it. When?
Ask Dutch anything on Tuesday. Yeah. That's gonna be it. That's gonna be it. Don't you? We're really building this up. I must say, we're building it up. Ask Dutch anything. It'll be a good. Let me just stick with Mick for a minute. One, why would you need any more motivation to lose 100 pounds other than that you've got 4 kids and you're a walking heart attack? I mean, surely that would be enough motivation to, lose a huge amount of weight because you're morbidly obese.
Okay, go to the mall or go to somewhere where there's people. You see those guys or women all the time. If they should be motivated to lose weight too. But so you can't blame that on Mick.
I can blame it on everyone, really. The other thing is, I mean, he couldn't take his own socks off 15 years ago. So what kind of shape is he going to be in 15 years later?
How do you know he couldn't take his socks off?
Because he was on an episode of Wife Swap, and that was actually revealed on the episode of Wife Swap.
He couldn't take his socks off.
No, he couldn't actually get down to take his socks off. That's like how basically beat up and crippled he was back then. And I can't imagine he's got better. He had a brief period when he was doing DDP yoga, free plug for you, Dallas, and he dropped a load of weight. He got back briefly into like a GM position on WWE TV. He looked the best he'd looked since 2004. And then for whatever reason, he just didn't do it anymore, and then he just put all the weight back on, and he just fell out of love with working out, I guess.
And you heard that this is his last podcast?
His last podcast is done and out now. It's done. Yeah.
Well, I would be interested in seeing his last match. I would. I would even pay to see his last match, but under a wrestler discount. Like if he wanted to charge $75 to see it, I said, yeah, I might go for 10. So let me in on the big 80% off discount, and here. I want a good seat, so I want to see it. But I think it'd be pretty interesting, really, now that I think about it.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. It'd be more interesting than Rick's, because Rick's was more like, will he die? Live on pay-per-view.
Well, that's fatalistic.
You thought that, come on.
But in Mick's case, he has all kind of gimmicks he can use. Like I said, the fluorescence and the tacks on the floor and the tables and the barbed wire and this, that, and the other, and the fire and the blood and the guts. So he's not going 90 miles an hour. Rick had to actually get in. I'm going to give him credit. Rick had to get in there. He had nothing to depend on except himself. And he proved that he himself is not enough. Because people, if they say, is he going to die? Yeah, that's not a good thing to lead the match with.